Good morning.
Good morning.
All power to the people.
All power to the people.
On the move.
On the move.
My name is King Downing, and I'm the program analyst for American Friends Service Committee's Healing Justice Program. We call it the Healing Justice Program because too much of it is on the punishment, the torture, and the abuse side when we call it the Criminal Justice Program, because it is a criminal justice program, because the program itself needs to be charged and incarcerated for abuse, racial profiling, and any other charges you can come up. You feel me?
Yes, King.
Criminality. So we call it the healing justice system because we are trying to transform human beings, and we're trying to transform the system into making people who have gone the way of criminal conviction to be able to re-enter into society and get some of the things that they were denied in the first place. And I'll get more into that kind of work later. I wanted to start off because one of our first principles is that we believe in hearing from the people who are most affected. So I don't have anything to say. I'm not calling up anybody on this list, although we do have somebody who is a family member of an incarcerated person, and we put them on high priority. But we want to hear from the people themselves who are in solitary confinement. So we have a video that we would like you to look at to get their voices and their perspective on what's going on there. And then we'll move forward with the program.
The hole, the bucket, the can,
the box, the hole, the bin,
The chiller,
lockup,
Maxi.
the shoe.
Solitary confinement.
The cell was probably like maybe 7 feet, maybe 9 feet long.
Maybe 9 by 6.
It's very small.
the cell was a windowless cell.
The walls were cinder block.
The floor, it was concrete.
The bed is concrete. There's a small concrete slab that serves as your table.
You had nothing in the room but you.
It's hard to describe nothing.
This your lonely body in a cell that's empty. That's what solitary confinement is.
metal and cement.
That was it.
The light,
There's lights on most of the night.
double neon light.
The light would be on sometimes 24/7. It never went out.
The situation I was in, they never turned the lights on. The lights were out 24 hours a day. There was a big door that closed, and you didn't hear anything outside of the door.
It can get eerily quiet in these places.
Real quiet.
Most of what you're going to hear is your own breathing. You might hear your heart rate pumping up. And so when there is a noise, it's just nerve-wracking.
Coming onto the tier, it's a heavy steel door and it opens electrically, which means you hear
I really wanted to talk to somebody, just somebody to be there.
You can go days without talking to people. Sometimes weeks, sometimes months.
You can't touch anyone.
No more human touch.
Except for aggressive touching by guards when they would come in to chain me up to take me out.
Even if you have family, there's no contact visits at all.
There's a glass in front of you with the person visiting you on the other side.
My daughters were trying to kiss the glass and kiss me through the glass.
It was painful. It's very painful.
I've spent 7.5 years in the control unit.
Maybe about 12 years in lockdown.
I was there for 29 years,
many, many years in solitary confinement.
29 years, Solitary confinement is just as real could be. It could wipe the mind.
It damages you psychologically, because human beings need to interact with each other.
It's not normal to be in the dark for days and days and days on end.
I could hardly sleep. I had insomnia.
Waking up at night in the sweats, panic attacks.
They would trigger something in my nerves where I would break out in hives from head to toe.
I lost track of time.
There's no concept of time. You know no time in lockdown. There's sleep and awakeness. That's it. And the madness in between.
I would try to hear things, try to hear human voices. And sometimes I would imagine that I was hearing noises.
You start hearing things that's not even being said.
And say, yeah. You know, yeah, what? And nobody's answering.
The anger, the rage, bitterness, anxiety, the nightmares. And as years passed, it just seemed like the walls in the cell began to close in. They begin to close in. You can feel your mind like trying to escape from you.
And what happens is chaos.
Insanity.
They'll say the end of the barrel. That's what the prison officials call it.
Call it maximum security, administrative segregation.
Control units.
Stigma unit.
Isolation.
Special housing.
La solapa.
Seg.
You know, on and on and on and on and on.
So many of them.
I would say torture chambers. No other way to describe them.
Of course, it's torture. It's torture in every form of fashion.
For the appreciation of that was done by AFSC's Stop Max program. And we want to keep it short and sweet, but we believe in giving people a feeling of what that situation is like, because too many times we treat this as abstract. And one of our challenges to people is, go to your bathroom, take 5 days worth of food, take some newspapers, some books and notes, and this is an idea that Elisa and I, who is working with us, doing research, came up with. Go in your bathroom with 5 days worth of food, newspapers, and books, and your choice. You want to do it with the lights off or do it with the lights on, or you can flip it back and forth either way. Bring your music in there, and I guarantee you'll be out of there before you even finish the first half day's food. And you may be out of there in a few hours, but we want to try to make this real because we want to personalize this and then figure out how we're going to deal with the problem. So we're here to do 3 things. The first is to get a feeling for and come up with a plan of action for dealing with torture. The second one is to deal with the situation that particularly applies to our political prisoners around isolation and torture because of the fact that it's being used to silence the very people who have been fighting on behalf of our community. And the third one is to deal with Mumia Abu Jamal in every aspect of his case, but especially right now, the fact that they're holding him in solitary confinement, and we know the reasons for that. All right? It has to do with silence and breaking the spirit. But after all these years, there are other people who are going to talk about how effective that's going to be. So let's just move on. And I want to start out. Oh, and I also want to mention, did anybody see any political prisoners? This is a trivia question. I have a prize for you. Did anybody see any political prisoners? And I use the term in a narrow sense of people who are incarcerated before. Some people are not going to be able to raise their hand because I know some family of political prisoners know the political prisoners that were in there. But I would like somebody to name. I'm going to disqualify our speakers. See if there are people in the audience, and then I'll get you all a chance to say something. Is there anybody that recognized any political prisoners among those who were in the videotape?
One of them was the Angola.
One of the Angola 3. Anybody know who it was?
Yep.
Who said it?
Teresa.
Oh, see, I know. Okay. She deserves it. Robert King. What's the rest of the last part of his name? Wilkinson. All right. And my only claim to fame is that I was part of the Angola 3 founding coalition, the New York branch of it. The other thing is that people mix the two of us up. When they say, oh, I got a call from King. And it was me who called, but they're thinking, yeah, Robert called? They're all excited they find out it was me. It's like, oh, I can talk to him anytime. Who else? Who else?
Bilal Sudiata Ali.
Bilal Sudiata Ali. Give her a hand for that. Okay. Randy Koofy. And
Laura Whitehorn. Yeah.
well, we know you knew.
Oh.
We know you knew, but you had your hand up to Laura Whitehorn. And who is she, Pam?
Political prisoner. She's out now.
She's out now.
Yes. And she has a book.
She has a book.
And she does speaking engagements all around the country and outside on all the political prisoners.
And
what else?
And right now in New York, she is part of a group that I'm part of, and that is the Occupy Wall Street People of Color Prison Industrial Complex Subcommittee. We do teachings and we're doing organizing now in the boroughs because we have formerly incarcerated coming to Occupy Wall Street, which added a little flavor down there. Right. And now we're going back out into the boroughs. So she's solidly into the middle of that. Okay, so next, we're going to hear from somebody who needs no introduction. She can introduce herself. We want Mona to come up. Ramona Africa, come up and set the context for this. All right.
On the move. On the move. Well, the first thing I want to say, and I want to always drive home, is that when we take a stand for Mumia, when we protest what is happening to him, we're not just doing it for him. We're doing it for ourselves.
Right.
Because what kind of people would we be if we could just accept what is happening to Mumia, or what has happened to my family, or what is happening to, other prisoners, Leonard Peltier, Oscar Lopez Rivera, and a host of other prisoners around the world, literally. It says something about us. It's who we are and what we do. So we should never lose sight of that. We should never fall into the trap of thinking, oh, we're always being asked to do something for Mumia or Leonard or whoever. This is for ourselves. This is for us, because there is no way I could sit back and see these things happening and not feel compelled to do something about it, to take a stand. Whatever, you can do. Nobody is telling you specifically what you gotta do, but you need to do whatever it is that you can, to put an end to these atrocities. The other thing that I wanna focus on here is that I know all of you know that Mumia is in the hole. He is on administrative custody, and the conditions that he is in are worse than they were on death row. Right. And that's telling you something. It is. He doesn't have his word processor, typewriter, whatever you want to call it. He doesn't have enough writing, paper material. He doesn't have his TV. He can't get all the commissary that he would like to get. He can only get specific things, And the point I want to make about this is why it's happening. How is it that Mumia could be on death row and the courts, commute that death sentence to life in prison without parole, which is another atrocity, but nevertheless, commute that sentence to life in prison without death row, transfer Mumia off of death row to another prison, and his conditions be worse. They go from one thing to another to keep him under these horrific conditions. Why is that? It's one reason. These people are furious. Furious that they could not legally kill him the way they intended to. They are furious. They are, aren't they? So, just like little spoiled brats who are a lot more dangerous, they start doing whatever they feel like they can get away with, as long as they feel like they can get away with it. Our job, our aim, our goal, our intention is to put an end to it, to let them know that their reign of terror is over. That we, the people, ain't taking this. We're not going to have it. Because for real, the only way that all of the atrocities that we complain about can exist is if the masses of people allow it. Because those in authority are this big. We the people are this big. This big. I mean, we can put an end to anything that we really want to. War, police brutality. I mean, Obama can declare a war, but he ain't talking about going out there on the battlefield and fighting it. He's relying on the people to do that for him. And that means it's up to us, the people, whether we choose to do it or not. You know? He ain't gonna do it by himself. He can't do it alone. You know? So I'm just talking about, you know, the power that we, the people, have, that we overlook, that we take for granted and don't focus on. You know? When the Panthers said it, and when we still say it today, all power to the people, we better understand what that means. We better realize the power that we the people have. That's right. You know, and use it, because power that you don't use, strength you don't use, if I don't use my arm, if I never use it, never raise it, what's going to happen to it? It's going to, what they call atrophy, means lose all its muscle, or just, you know, nothing. Is that what we want to see happen to the power that we have? So that we can then just be a doormat? You know, for those in authority? Hell no. I know I'm not.
I know I'm not either.
All right. So we have work to do, serious work to do. You know, we got to stop digging a deeper hole for ourselves and start taking steps to climb out of that hole and send a strong, clear message to those in authority that they are being dealt with. That, you know, we the people have woken up, and that we ain't sleep no more, and that we're not taking this nonsense. They are not getting away with it. And I'll tell you, you know, up front, straight, no chaser. One of the main reasons I feel this way is because of what I've gone through. You know, I had a bomb dropped on me. You know, anybody that can not only experience something like that, but see this kind of thing happen and not feel compelled, you know, to put an end to it, not for me or not for Moo, but so that it doesn't ever happen to you and your family. What do we want to do? Wait until something happens to us, to our family, our friends, before we get outraged and say, oh my God, we got to do something. No. Do it now so it doesn't happen to you and your family. You know, and that's something that Brother Troy Davis taught us with the campaign, I Am Troy Davis. You know, we are all the same. We are one. And anything that can happen to any of us, you know, can happen to all of us. Can happen to all of us. So we gotta get on the move, get on the good foot, and take a stand, you know, to put an end to this insanity, because that's what it is, insanity. These people that are torturing Mumia like this, the people who have, you know, just arrogantly and consistently stated that Mumia is a cop killer, when they can't prove it at all, when it was never proven in court. I mean, that's insanity, because why are they doing it? Just like the people that continue to call my family cop killers. Come on. The judge who sat on the case said he didn't have, quote, the faintest idea who killed that cop. But you got the FOP, racists out there, you know, all kinds of people out there that still want to call my family cop killers, say that they killed the cop. Based on what? You see, there is so much hate out there that drives people that we cannot afford to turn a blind eye to it and just let it go. We cannot afford to do that. We can't afford to do it for ourselves, and we can't afford to do it for our children, their children, and their children. We cannot afford to turn a blind eye. So I want to point out that there was a large meeting at Calvary Church here in Philadelphia a couple of Sundays ago. We broke down into 3 different committees, and the one committee that I'm a part of, the Occupy the U.S. Justice Department for Mumia and against mass incarceration, we have decided that on April 24th, on Mumia's birthday, that we are going to D.C. to occupy the U.S. Justice Department and demand an end to this nonsense. To push these people to do something, because that's the only way they are going to do anything, is if we force them to do it. And we intend to force them to action by calling attention to the situation. And for those who know people or who themselves have in the back of their mind, well, why is everything mumia, mumia, mumia? There's other prisoners, yes there are. And everything that Mumia is going through, has gone through, shines a spotlight on what is happening to every other prisoner and benefits every other prisoner. You know, not that we don't always talk about other prisoners and what they're going through when we're dealing with Mumia, but just so it's clear that Mumia's case and what he's going through in the prison, in the courts, etc., do in fact shine a spotlight on what is going on in this system, period, all over it. So I just wanted to make that clear. I just want people to understand that the outrage that we feel, you know, when we see things like what is happening to Mumia, when we see the bombing of Mu, you know, when we feel the grief of losing people like Marilyn Buck, you know, it's not enough to just feel outraged. We have to turn that outrage into action. Because these people don't give a damn about what we feel. Right. They don't care about that. It doesn't affect them at all. They ain't feeling it. Right. You know? We have to make them understand by turning those feelings into action. Right. That's the only way that they're going to, you know, feel anything, that they're going to get the message. All right? Feelings are not enough. You have to turn those feelings into action. And that's what we intend to do, no matter what. What do we have to lose? You know? Chains. What do we have to lose? Yeah, our chains. You know? So, I hope people will mark off April 24th on the calendars. Also, February 20th, there's a mass Occupy against prisons. Yeah. And where is that at? In DC?
Everywhere.
Everywhere. Oh, everywhere. Okay, so everywhere people are going to do something. So get more information about that and get involved. Get involved.
Right, get involved.
You know. What are you trying to say? Oh, my time is up. But there's no need for a lot of words anyway. We ain't got to do a lot of talking. We got to take action. And that's the bottom line. Get on the move. Long live Mumia. Long live the Move 9. Long live Russell Schultz, Oscar Lopez Rivera. You know, all our freedom fighters, including those grandmothers, those native grandmothers in Big Mountain, Arizona. So, long live revolution. On the move.
Okay, I'm here to talk about some of the legal status of Mumia's current fight to get into general population, having just come off of death row. But I want to begin by saying that this is a very small aspect of Mumia's fight, a very small amelioration of the horrible conditions he's been under for 30 years for a crime that he did not commit, that he never should have been arrested for, never prosecuted, never convicted, and never sentenced to death. And that struggle is our real fight. The fight to make it clear that his entire prosecution was a frame-up, orchestrated by the cops on the scene, by the district attorney, by the with a racist judge, and actually conspired with by the U.S. Justice Department. All of these things are further discussions for more time, but all of these, the entire aspect, every facet of the United States criminal justice system has been complicit in this fact that Mumia Abu Jamal, an innocent man, has spent 30 years in one form or another of the whole. Different aspects of it, but everything. So for the first 8 years, he was in an RHU unit that was very much described as in this very powerful film. And he was there for the simple reason that he refused for religious beliefs to have his hair cut. And he fought against that every way possible. And he was not released by any legal reason from any court proceeding or anything, but because there was tremendous amount of activity and support from him from an international movement that was growing for him to save his life and to free him from this from prison. He has been in, as everyone knows, was in death row, simply in death row, for then another 22 years, which is another form of the whole, in which visits were restricted, when he could not, touch his wife, hold his children, as he said in an interview in 1990, and it's 20 years later that he is still under those circumstances. And what is going on right now, as people have said, is he is now back in an RHU unit, which is the conditions of which are more strict, more repressive than they even were on death row. It's hard to imagine, but that is the case. This was his punishment, retaliation for defeating the legal lynching that the state had planned for him, the fury that they have. The FOP, the current district attorney, former Governor Rendell, who was the DA who prosecuted Mumia, made it perfectly clear that they were going to make his life in prison for the rest of his life as miserable, as difficult, as repressive as they possibly could do. And that was the point of putting him in this AC unit, this administrative custody, which is supposed to be a simple transition, maybe a couple of days prior to him being moved into general population. Because legally speaking, if you go by the letter of the law, there's only really one legal condition for people in the state of Pennsylvania, which is general population, unless in fact you have an active death warrant against you, in which case you go into a capital case unit. Aside from that, everything else is basically subject to, by their laws, even by their laws, the question of due process, what the particulars of the person are, which they violate every day, because that's the nature of the way the criminal justice works. To the extent we have, which we do have in writing, constitutional rights, a fair trial, First Amendment, Fourth Amendment, all of those things, they exist to the extent that the criminal justice system and the state is compelled to give them effect. Only then. So in Mumia's case, what we have now is a situation where he's spent 7 weeks, almost 50 days, in this draconian form of RHU, solitary, the whole, because he defeated the death sentence. Now, the argument made in legal papers that I've received on Mumia's behalf from the Department of Corrections say that the reason he was put in this AC place was because, one, get this, he was moved from death row, which he was, on December 8th, because there is a vacated death warrant that the district attorney agrees to. Get those different components? Recognizing that it was vacated, when in fact, it was overruled 10 years ago, in December 2001, by Justice Yohn. It was challenged in every single step of the way for Mumia's trial and through post-conviction appeals in '83, in '88, and in '90 and in '98. Each of those times, the courts absolutely upheld his conviction, refused to do anything about it, and upheld his death sentence. Finally, in 2001, the death sentence was overturned, and the district attorney insisted on keeping him in death row, which he did for 10 more years while the case was prosecuted through 2 times through the appellate courts, to the Supreme Court 2 times, until the Supreme Court finally said last October they are not going to intervene. Then it took the DA another 2 months to decide what to do, and within 24 hours of the DA, not a court of law, the DA saying, okay, I give up, I can't get his death sentence, it's not legally possible, nor is it politically advantageous for me. Within 24 hours, he was moved by the Department of Corrections from death row, at which point he should have gone immediately into general population. Right. Instead, they said, no, even though the DA has agreed to the vacated death sentence, we don't have a resentencing yet. And that was the argument they made for 5 weeks. Mumia went before week after week, what's called a program review committee that is required under the statutes and the regulations. They said Mumia's doing everything he needs to do. You know, he's got a good report. He was transferred, by the way, with 2 boxes of institutional records. They had 2 boxes of records, and they said, well, we need to wait for this resentencing before we really know what's happening with him, and who he is, and what's going on. All right? It was only after this campaign took off in every possible way, internationally, with some additional bit of legal push, but mostly the campaign, that they began to take some notice. And so it was only 2 weeks ago that they began actually what you might consider even a beginning of a processing for somebody into general population. The first time he was given a handbook, you know, of what you're supposed to do. I'm just saying this is their form. The first time he was told what tests he had to do. The first time he was told, okay, well, we'll put you in, but you gotta cut your hair, gotta take blood tests, all those things. So this was the thing that they did, and it was only a week ago that they finally have dropped this absolutely bogus argument that says they are waiting for a resentencing, which just makes proof of the lie of it all. Okay? Right. So where we are now is the need to increase, not to decrease, the political pressure in every possible way, and to remember in all ways and all times the only way to fight Fort Mumia and any other political prisoner, any other prisoner, in fighting against this injustice system, capitalist injustice system, is to recognize no illusions in the courts, none whatsoever. Because whatever the words about justice, they do not stand for justice. Right. No reliance on any politician. Let's get support from everybody. Let's demand they all come forward, but no reliance on them.
Right, right, right.
The only power there is the power of organizing.
Right.
And
right.
Organizing and going there and understanding that any legal strategy is part of, if not subordinate to, a political strategy. And the only way to fight for us all, as Mona said, is to fight for us all. Mumia fights for us all. We fight for him as a fight for us all.
Right.
And on this quick question of the RHUs, I just want to indicate that Mumia's own position is a recognition that what these are is institutionalized normalization of torture, which I think is a very powerful way of indicating the systemic critical portion of it. So I'm going to conclude right now and just say that this is an ongoing fight against the state that has kept him locked up, is a way of fighting against somebody who was known always as the voice of the voiceless, and he's maintained that through all his years.
Right.
Framed up because he was a former Black Panther Party member, political activist, a supporter of the MOVE organization, and a radical journalist in every way. Those are the reasons why he was framed up.
Right.
Those are the reasons why he's spent 30 years in prison so far. And it's only been the fight to expose all that, to organize against it, that has him off of death row, which is no justice for him, but it is a defeat for those that wanted him legally lynched.
We have a special kind of family member, and those are the ones that we refer to as the Cubs. The Cubs have a difficult situation because not only do they have family members who are in solitary, but they know that their family members are there for political reasons only, that they never disrupted or tore up anything inside the prison or had any kind of reason outside other than to be silenced. And so there are a lot of Cubs who are really kind of like dealing with like post-traumatic stress disorder. And for them, just getting on with the day-to-day living that we take for granted, education, lives, families, that is something that they have not been able to deal with. But then we get these other kind of Cubs who have like longer ears, their claws are a little longer, their teeth are a little sharper, and they are back in the movement for another generation, another round. And so we really give it to them. So I can't be referring to anybody but Teresa Shelby.
Exactly.
And when she came over, I said, "Oh no, did they arrest you too?"
I stand up for Teresa.
All right, stand up and give us some props. All right, recognize the next generation.
Thank you all. Thank you for your past support. Is that working? Okay, good enough. So any case, what I do want to say is that, yes, this does continue. And I always have to look at Pam and Ramona's leadership, and it makes me say, stick with it, stay consistent. Because when people question why Mumia and so many other political prisoners, such as my father and I both agree that, first of all, his life was on the line. And there was no other duty but to fight for him first. The second is that he is a voice that is so powerful and is so recognized that we have no other choice but to let him take the lead. And my dad and I have both always agreed on that. I always say that when I speak that our youth are living in an American dream and they can't wake up. And I really realized that when up at SCI Green, over 15 youth, well, guys in their 20s, I say, hung themselves. It was more than 15. Hung themselves in 1 year because they were in 23-hour lockdown. And Daddy said they come strolling in, and within 6 months they walking like zombies. And they can't handle that type of lockdown. From coming from this dream that they were living in on a corner street to solitary confinement. And if they want to test our youth, boy, is that a hell of a test for our youth who have missed out on the type of strength that we have, that we couldn't reach those youth, or somehow they didn't come and reach out to us, or it's just so many that are living this crazy dream here in America. So I always like to point that out, how many took their lives in 1 year. And Daddy didn't even recognize it on the same unit. He seen them coming in and he's yelling to them what to do. In the short time that they walking by the door when they first come in, and he's telling them read, to just try to stay sane. And he called me one day, he said, it's so cold in here, you gotta do something, call whatever. So when I called, that was the issue. Teresa, don't worry, your dad is okay. We're revamping the heating because so many guys have hung themselves. I said, what? Like what? And then I got the story, and we don't get it here because it's closer to Pittsburgh, SCI Green, but I looked in the Pittsburgh Gazette, and yeah, there it was. and most of them had came from Philadelphia, born and raised here. So in any case, so demand that we save our youth. I also like to focus on Ramona's always saying we have the power, because we do. I really wish Bill Bachman was here, because one time these two goons, Lynch and Peters, kept harassing my dad, and he was going to end up eventually with an infraction. And I said, Dad, I'll call. He said, no, you got to go up there. And just those words, I was on Amtrak the next day. And they were saying, what are you doing here? And I'm saying, what are you going to do about Lynch and Peters? Oh, well, they're just guards. Maybe your dad is acting out. How could he be acting out? No, your guys are acting out. So when we talk about the power, I called on you guys. We were calling, mailing letters, jamming their fax machine, and Bill Bachman and I were on the Turnpike or Garden State Parkway somewhere. He's not here to verify this, but the Department of Corrections called. Where are we going today? Jeffrey Beard's office, 8 o'clock at night. I'm like, Daddy said, I just knew he was going. And I said, I'm going to fuss SCI Green out. They couldn't call and tell me that. They had to have the secretary, and they said, can you please call off? Call off the phone calls. And I was like shaking in my boots almost, and I remember my dad and everybody else saying, don't do it. You know, take what you want. Don't go along with them. They will lie to you, and they have lied to me in the past. And I said, what did you say? She said, can you call off all the phone calls? I said, what are you doing here this time of night? She said, we couldn't get no work done with all the phone calls and jam the fax machine. And I thought about it, I said, no, you back off. You back off. You don't back off. And not until you back off. If you don't back off from us, we ain't gonna back off from you. The next day, they got rid of Lynch and Peters. So we do have the power. Don't ever forget that. We have the power, and we must use it. So I got calls yesterday after Michael Kors radio show. And everyone was on there. I heard you guys. It was wonderful. It was excellent to educate. People were calling me saying, I don't believe that death row is better than this hope. I said, no, believe it. Because when Lynch and Peters were messing with my dad, these two officers, I complained so much. I went up to Camp Hill, and they transferred him to death row. And I said, why would you put my dad there? Well, Teresa, you'll be satisfied. And when Daddy called, he said, Teresa, thank you. He said, it's quiet, it's peaceful. I can hear, I can think, the lights are off. They give these dudes respect over here. Wow. I said, why? So he said, they don't want to mess with, the guys on death row. Now, they gave me fair warning. We're going to transfer him. But you will not get those amenities. He will not get a typewriter. He will, whatever. Just as long as he's away from Lynch and Peters. My bottom line today is that my dad will be 70 years old this year. 40 years in prison, 30 years in solitary confinement without any infractions. And that's why I pushed so hard to have him move to death row, because one infraction could jam him right now, even with the 30-year clean record. I spoke with the Program Review Board. They see prisoners every 90 days to determine whether or not they can be released. And it's Mr. Rogers at SCI Green. Matter of fact, we just spoke recently, but last year I had King Downing. He wasn't at his desk though. And I'm with Rogers. I'm saying, why won't you, when is the time coming, what we're going to do? He said, well, your dad is a leader, Trees. I said, what? Do you remember that tape? I said, wait a minute. I got to get somebody else on the phone because, my memory is so bad. Sometimes you guys tell me stuff and it don't be the truth. So I dialed him, but he didn't answer, but this machine is still running. And he said, I said, no, my daddy has heart disease, prostate issues, eye issues. He said, no, your dad is a leader. I said, no, he's a grandfather. He said, you don't know your dad. He's a leader. I said, what did you just? He said, I said he's a leader. And we don't want to release him. The recording came up. Please press the button and leave your message. He said, so you were recording me. I said, well, you knew I had called the attorney. It's illegal to record people without their knowledge. He said, well, I don't care anyway, because I said everything that was the truth. So if they think that I'm going to stand for that. No, you shouldn't stand for that either. We're not going to stand for it. Eventually, he's going to be released. And I just thank you, Pam, and everyone else for giving me the opportunity to follow you guys' lead. Like today when we go up to Wetzel's office, because when I was telling Daddy the other day, I said, what should I do? He said, go with them. All of them are doing right. You just stand in the background, just keep following lead, just keep learning and learning. And it's sad to say that I had to learn from the Move family.
It ain't sad, that's a blessing.
It's sad because of the injustice that has happened to them.
Okay. In that aspect, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So in any case, I'm gonna go on that note, but we gotta fight. And we gotta keep fighting. And I told SCI Green that and Wetzel's office, I said, we're for a fight. And I don't take that the wrong way. Oh, well, we won't, but we don't take threats, and neither do I.
No,
That's with my dad. Oh, by the way, he got his surgery, another surgery on the eye about 3 weeks ago. He didn't hear a word. I didn't have to ask you for one letter. I didn't have to ask you guys to make a phone call. You know why? They're trying to justify the solitary confinement. I wrote one letter and the response was, we're going to take care of him. We're going to give him the best medical. Why? Because you want to keep him in solitary confinement. I don't care about your medical treatment. You're going to do that. You're going to give him what he deserves, but you're going to release him.
All right.
Another hand for Teresa Show. Zero, representing the next generation. And isn't that something she's talking about? She's talking about learning from y'all. I learned from her. Okay. And I don't. Mic check. Mic check. You back off.
You back off.
You back off.
You back off.
If you don't back off.
If you don't back off.
What?
We won't back off.
That's right. That's right. Okay. All right. Now we're going to take another AV pause, and we're going to look at a DVD before we get on to our next speaker. So Daryl, from the Third World Coalition of AFSC, is doing double duty as a speaker and our technical person today.
All right, brothers and sisters, keep praying.
Simply torture. It's been well known for a long time. It's savagery.
Oh, you don't recognize the voice. Who is it? All right.
Incredible crime. All of these things are a true international scandal. He's a striking case, but it's far more general. The maximum security prisons in the United States are horrendous. I mean, they make Guantanamo look like a vacation resort. Same with death row. Executions in the United States are far beyond the norm. There are very few countries, except ones we prefer not to mention, which use the death penalty either at all or anything like the U.S. does. Noam Chomsky for Mumia Abu Jamal. Prison and government officials are trying to censor and silence Mumia Abu Jamal. I stand as one of many Americans who believe that there's a tremendous value in his voice being heard. I and others will fight to make sure that both his voice and his body are free. How much is your child worth? How much is your grandchild worth? These are not trick questions. They arise from the news that North Carolina recently announced cash compensation to thousands of survivors of their state sterilization program that ran from 1929 to 1974, an astonishing 45 years. North Carolina was but one of the many, mostly southern states that sterilized people whom it considered as defective. In this they were supported by authorities as august as the U.S. Supreme Court, which in its now infamous Buck v. Bell 1927 decision found that a state could properly sterilize its citizens, and citizens had no constitutional right to oppose it. For, in the words of Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. A North Carolina task force recommended payment of $50,000 for each survivor. North Carolina shouldn't be the whipping boy here, for such practices took place nationally with federal government support. Historians and scholars Mary Frances Berry and John Blassingame, in their 1982 work, Long Memory, The Black Experience in America, New York, Oxford University Press, they tell us that as late as the 1970s, the United States Department of Health, Education, and Welfare was forcing 100,000 to 150,000 people to be sterilized annually. Over 90% of these people were black. This horrific state practice and the U.S. Supreme Court's chilling reasoning in support of it gives us some insight into how social prejudices and attitudes percolate into all sections of society, and despite their self-evident madness, are seen by seemingly enlightened sectors as perfectly reasonable, only to be later tarnished as repellent with the passage of time. If a state or nation could sterilize its own so-called citizens, deny people the right and ability to have children, what is such a state or nation but a dictatorship of arrogance and power? One day, perhaps sooner than we suppose, we shall look back at the phenomenon of mass incarceration and the prison industrial complex as proof of a mad society. Perhaps such a future state will pay reparations, compensation to their survivors in 75 or 80 years, if any survive. Noam Chomsky for Mumia Abu Jamal.
You picked up on that. That was a statement of Mumia's that was read by Noam Chomsky, given that deep history. So one more round of applause for that. And I want to thank Noel Hanrahan for putting that up. You can get that on prisonradio.org. And you know who she is. She needs no introduction. She has been holding it down media-wise from the time that nobody cared about this case to the time that the world cared, and has still been doing it. So respect to her. Any delay, Michael Cord.
And I'm definitely going to be brief. And first of all, let me just say 3 words. Off, in, at. Remember that. I'm going to explain it at the end. Off, in, at. Having said that, I want to thank Pam for all the great work she does, Ramona and Johanna and Dr. Tony Montero. I saw him come in, Rachel, Lynn. But most important, I want to thank you all. I want to thank you all because if it weren't for the people fighting for Mumia, he'd still be on death row. So give yourselves a big round of applause. Also, I want to give a big shout out to Attorney Lennox Hines because he gave me some ideas that I'm going to share with you today. By the way, I know I speak for Lennox and every other conscious attorney when I say this, that we're not naive. We don't expect that we're going to go into a court of law and get justice. As a matter of fact, we don't go to court to get justice. We go to court to expose the injustice. And by going to court to expose the injustice, we win each and every time. In terms of what Lennox shared with me and what I've researched and some other lawyers have researched, we came up with 3 approaches for Mumia. One is based on international law, one is based on federal law, and the other is based on state law. International law, federal law, and state law. In regard to international law, it's based on a human rights violation argument. In other words, you saw it here on the presentation. International law has already indicated that solitary confinement is torture. And international law has always said and already said that torture is a violation of human rights. So if you have violation of human rights, if you got solitary confinement, then there's an argument to be made that Mumia's incarceration in solitary confinement violates international law. That's an argument we plan to make. From international law, we go to federal law. We all are familiar with the Eighth Amendment. Eighth Amendment deals with cruel and unusual punishment. And I'm going to explain to you exactly why Mumia's current ongoing incarceration constitutes cruel and unusual punishment. And then, on the state level, there's something called Article 1, Section 13. Article 1, Section 13 says the same and even more than the Eighth Amendment. So when you talk about cruel and unusual punishment on the state level here in Pennsylvania, you're talking about Article 1, Section 13. Now, that's the law explaining what the problem is. Violation of human rights on the international level, violation of the Eighth Amendment, cruel and unusual punishment on the federal level, and violation of Article 1, Section 13 on the state level. That's the problem. So what's the remedy? The remedy is this. First, you had Mumia on death row, and you had the federal district court saying that was illegal. You had the Third Circuit Court of Appeals saying that's illegal. You had the U.S. Supreme Court saying that's illegal. So you got all these courts saying that Mumia's incarceration on death row was unconstitutional. So now he's got to go from death row to life. And by the way, without getting too complicated, in Pennsylvania, you got 3 types of murders. You got first-degree murder, which could give you death penalty or life imprisonment. You got second-degree murder, which could give you life imprisonment. And you got third-degree murder, which could give you 20 to 40 years in prison max. So if we had Mumia on death row, and that's unconstitutional, the remedy is to move him to life. But then, in terms of the life sentence, if life, as I said, is if based on first-degree murder, based on second-degree murder, you get life, but we find out that Mumia has been held unconstitutionally on death row for 30 years, then we got to fix the problem of life imprisonment based on first or second degree. So if you go from first degree death penalty and then you go down to life imprisonment, and we found out that that's got to be wrong because Mumia didn't serve. If Mumia was legally tried and legally convicted, then he should have gotten life imprisonment if he was legally tried and legally convicted. Right. But he wasn't legally tried, he wasn't legally convicted, and he spent 30 years on death row. So now we got to say, hey, we took him off death row, we can give him life. If we give him life, that still doesn't fix the 30 years that he spent on death row. Right. So now you need a remedy. The remedy now steps down to what we lawyers consider a kind of third-degree punishment. And if third degree is 20 to 40 years, the way it works in Pennsylvania is this, and by the way, I'm going to wrap this up in 3 minutes. If third-degree murder is 20 to 40 years in Pennsylvania, the way the law works in the state is you're eligible for parole when you do half your minimum. So if third degree is 20 to 40, half of 20 is 10. So after 10 years, you should be out. Mumia didn't just spend 10 years in prison. He didn't spend 10 years on death row. He spent 30 years on death row. Okay. So now we need a remedy. And the remedy is to remove Mumia from prison. Because you already took him off death row. Now you got him serving life. And even if you give him a third degree 20 to 40, he should now be out. So you go from off death row, off life, off general population, and out of prison. So the argument is based on international law argument, federal law argument, and state law argument. And by the way, there's something called injunctive relief. Injunctive relief means you go into court and you say to a court, hey, somebody's doing something wrong and I want you, court, right here, right now, to enjoin this person, to stop this person. And talking to Lennox Hines, that's his strategy, that we file either a motion for injunctive relief in either a federal court. Why? Because the U.S. Supreme Court already said Mumia shouldn't have been on death row. And then in state court, because state courts must adhere to what federal courts do. Right. That gets kind of complicated, but that's an argument to me. Side issue, without naming names, I spoke to a member of the Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus 2 hours ago. And this person, whose name I can't share right now, has a relationship with a certain state official. And without saying too much, if you listened to my show about a year ago, I had that particular state official on my radio show. And that state official said all the right things. And I see the timekeeper in the corner, so I'm going to wrap up in 30 seconds. And that state official said all the right things. And about an hour or 2 hours ago, this other state official who has a direct connection with the person who could get Mumia off.
What we hear about is horrible. And just to review for a minute what we hear about. Could everybody repeat after me? Free Mumia!
Free Mumia!
Free all political prisoners!
Free all political prisoners!
And finally, abolish the new Jim Crow.
Abolish the new Jim Crow.
Okay, so that's what a lot of this is about, all of that. I'm going to talk not just about the international stuff, but briefly about the fight back that we've been waging. We have not been lying down. The movement, when it heard that Mumia was being tortured in his new setting, immediately hundreds of calls were made to all the officials involved. Seth Williams here in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, but the prison officials, the secretary, the superintendent, and they begged for us to stop the calling. And they were saying, look, we have no power, and bullshitting about all that kind of stuff to get us off. But in fact, we never stopped. And soon after, based on a letter that the National Lawyers Guild and another lawyers group put together, we added the demand to that letter of closing down all restrictive housing units in this country. And we put up a petition on the website that many of you know, freemumia.com. And in a very short period of time, we've gotten 5,000 signatures, in addition to all the snail mail, in addition to all the phone calls. And I was looking, I printed them up. It took me hours to print it out last night, all the names. These are the names, the 5,000 names. And they're from all over the world. It is really moving to see that. So the resistance is so powerfully international. And we need to remember that from South Africa, from all over Europe, from all across the United States, and so on. So that's one part. The thing I want to say that we should be, not only do I always talk about the fact that this movement has gone on for 30 years, which is remarkable in a country that consistently has a movement that moves from issue to issue, and very short-lived movements. I always remind people, the movement against the war in Vietnam lasted for 8 years. 8 years. One of the biggest anti-war movements, if not the largest, in the history of the United States. The Mumia movement has lasted for 30 years. And look at it. Over 1,000 people in Constitution Center in December, thousands and thousands of people writing letters, calling, what can we do more, and so on. This movement has not stopped, is continuing, and will continue until Mumia is free, all the political prisoners are free, and the new Jim Crow is abolished. Right. So we have a long-term struggle on our hands, and that's our strength. That's our strength, that we understand long-term struggles. And in particular, it's very exciting that we now have 3 levels of response that we are planning. The city level, the focus on Seth Williams, which some of you are in that task force that was formed to pressure Seth Williams and to get the city of Philadelphia to look at who this man really is and force him to do something he doesn't want to do, which is to demand the repeal, I think that's the word, I think there's another word, of the conviction of Mumia, and that's that movement. The Occupy, that city, Philadelphia, the Occupy Justice Department is a federal action, the United States on the federal level. There it is. Executive branch of the United States, the Justice Department, go right to the heart of that power. That's the national level. And then we are starting in many, many levels, and Michael Kort just alluded to it, an international level of struggle. That's powerful. Now, the international level can't force the United States to do anything, but they can embarrass the hell out of him. That's right. That's right. And we have very exciting news to announce, which is that yesterday we had a meeting with the Special Rapporteur on Torture of the United Nations in Washington, D.C. We met with him. We filed a request with him. Originally, this is a long-term, what we have asked Lennox Hines to work on that. We have a long-term strategy around that work. But when the situation came up around Mumia having its torture increased, with this situation right now, we went back to Juan Mendez and said, could you look into this situation immediately? And guess what? They've taken the case, they're looking into the situation, reviewing it. People can call him, the press, if there's any media wants to talk to him. Juan E. Mendez, I have his card, I can give it to you. There's, something's gonna come of that. We can't announce anything yet, but I'm sure something will come of that, and it's very powerful. And he also educated us about all the other possible international levels and organizations and venues for challenging Mumia's conviction. Not only the issue of torture, but Mumia's conviction. So we have a teacher, an ally, who's a gem. And I am thrilled to announce that. And he will surely be working with Lennox Hines. And we will be figuring out many different angles. So this is not a short-term thing. This is a long-term thing. But we're going to do it, folks. We're going to do it, and we're going to succeed on all three levels, in this city, nationally, and internationally. And that's how we're going to free Mumia. We're going to be delivering these 5,000 signatures to John Wetzel, the Secretary of Corrections, this afternoon at this next press conference. So I brought it here, but we will be delivering there, which is at Camp Hill, which is not too far from Harrisburg. And we're having a caravan of cars going there from here. And anybody who wants to join us, I know in my car there's still room, especially if somebody wants to help me drive, because I'm very tired. So a driver gets definitely preference, but anybody is welcome, and we have other cars. So please join us. We want a significant caravan to show them that we will not let them alone. Teresa Schultz is a model for how to be such a pest that they have to listen to you. A revolutionary pest. That's a phrase we can use too.
All right, give it up for Susan and Rob. Revolutionary pest. Bug spray won't stop it. Okay, our next speaker is an example of the way that it should be done when we think about the legal profession. And not only as an individual who represents that, but also as part of an organization that has been doing this for years and years and years and years, has been setting an example, not only for other lawyers, but also for young lawyers, which is at a time when people are impressionable and they're on the fence. I mean, even the ones that are thinking about public interest and political activities aren't really always thinking about activism as part of it, and taking direction from movements and not using legal mumbo jumbo to try to assert personal opinions and political views in the name of law. And so this organization and this person represent that. And so come on up, Heidi Bogosian.
In talking about being in it for the long haul, the National Lawyers Guild is staying with Mumia as long as it takes to get him out of prison. For those of you who don't know, he's actually been on our board of directors for about 15 years. He's our National Jailhouse Lawyer Vice President. Right there. His case, as you know, has become deeply symbolic, distilling growing concern over the criminalization of black men, the increasing use of the death penalty, the legal persecution of political radicals, and the gutting of basic defendants' rights. Briefly, I want to remind you of a quotation from the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King from his August '63 March on Washington, because it remains sadly appropriate for today. He said, "When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American would fall heir. It is obvious today, and this was nearly 50 years ago, that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. We have also come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. Indeed, the fierce urgency of now is with us in Mumia's case, and that is why we are here today. We must let the world know that an unjust prosecution, indeed the entire criminal justice system in Philadelphia and in Pennsylvania, defaulted on its obligation to ensure a fair trial for Mumia. It excluded African-American jurors, presented highly misleading ballistic evidence, coerced witnesses, suppressed and destroyed exculpatory evidence, and denied Mumia the right to face his accusers by excluding him from the courtroom. Also, a judge brazenly displayed open bias and racial hostility. The Third Circuit has rightfully acknowledged that the trial court's use of a faulty jury form and misleading instructions by the judge amount to a final unconstitutional infraction. So along with 50 days spent in the hole, the DA needs to honor the circuit court's findings and move Mumia into general population where standard procedure dictates he should go. Moving Mumia will be a small but significant step to right the many wrongs in his case.
Right.
The National Lawyers Guild demands it, the National Conference of Black Lawyers demands it, the Human Rights Research Fund demands it, and today all of us demand it with the fierce urgency of now.
We're fired up.
We'll take it over.
We're fired up.
We'll take it over.
Thank you, Heidi. She fired us up. See, that's the kind of lawyer, not the lawyer that's that fires you up. One other thing about the Guild I want to mention is the Guild Mass Defense Committee is always there backing us up and with us, and I'm part of it too. Whenever we march and have demonstrations, they're on the ground keeping an eye on our rights. So give them a hand for that. Now we shift into another area, and this time we're dealing with the question of media and outreach. Because we have the law, we have the activism, and we have the public education and outreach. And film is one of the vehicles that we do that. But once again, in the media, we also are looking for people who don't simply tell the story, but move the story. And I said, use the word move on purpose. They move the story, okay? They don't just record it. There is an objectivity that's involved, but once you put the camera down, that doesn't mean you have to go home and act like you're not in the world subjected to the same conditions that everybody else is. So our shining leader in that area is Johanna Fernandez, who's going to talk about any part of that she wants. And her film, Justice on Trial, is a must see. If you haven't already, shame on you.
Okay, wow. Where does one start? I just want to say something about Maroon Shoats, by the way. I've been visiting with Maroon Shoats since I started visiting Mumia about 8 years ago. And you should know that Mumia had the pleasure of talking to Maroon Shoats when he was transferred to AC.
That's right.
And he told me that his world was transformed intellectually because he had the honor to speak to this brilliant mind known as Maroon Shoats. And I just want to tell the story of what my marching orders were when I met Maroon Shoats. He essentially wanted all of the volumes of C.L.R. James's works. I got those for him, and then we proceeded to discuss C.L.R. James over many, many, many visits. This is a brilliant mind. This is one of the casualties of the Black Power and Civil Rights movement. After a revolution, there is a counter-revolution, and essentially what has happened with so many political prisoners is that they have been made an example by the state of what's going to happen to you if you dare to challenge it. That's why we must protect and fight for the freedom of Maroon Shoats, an incredible, brilliant mind. I visited Maroon Shoats and Mumia right before Mumia was released to AC. And he's just trying to understand the world, as he always is, and this is how he talks. And he's, got some incredible theories about Occupy Wall Street and what it represents for this new period of struggle. But he's trying to understand what SCI Green is gonna do with both Maroon and Mumia. And part of what he said was, the only thing I can imagine
is that they see Mumia and they see Frederick Douglass and they see me and they see Nat Turner. And so there is no snowball's chance in hell that they're going to have both of us in this facility. And that's this is what he told me on December 2nd, and I remember because it was my birthday and I was up in prison. And Mumia was moved on December 8th. So he essentially predicted that there was no way that Mumia and he would stay in that facility in this new period. I also want to echo something that Michael Cord said. And this was something that was articulated by Jack McMahon, the infamous Jack McMahon, when I interviewed him for the film Justice on Trial. Jack McMahon told me that Mumia should never have gotten the death penalty, and that he should have been out in 10 to 15 years. He said, because I know Mumia killed Officer Faulkner, we all believe that Mumia is innocent and that he killed absolutely no one and that he was framed by the cops. But he said to me, you know, Mumia killed Officer Faulkner, but you know, no one can say that this was premeditated murder because we know who Mumia is. He was a do-gooder journalist. And this was probably a situation of self-defense. And in Philadelphia, at that moment, even killing a cop in self-defense would get you out in 10 to 15 years. And then he proceeded to say, and this is all on tape, and Mumia is a stellar man who has written 7 books from prison. So he would have been out in the blink of an eye for his good character. And on that basis, we need to, well, that's one of the many arguments for Mumia's release that Michael Cord has put forth. But we can't accept that this idea that Mumia is guilty. The fact is that Mumia is innocent and was framed by the state. What's fascinating about this case, and what he told me, is that this is what happens to defendants who insist on their innocence. If you do not plea bargain in this system, they throw the book at you. And that's what they did with Mumia. Mumia stood firm on principle, he stood firm on his innocence, and because he did not cave into the violence and the injustice of the state, they gave him the death penalty. 30 years later, we are told that that sentence was unconstitutional. Like Lennox Hines said yesterday on the radio, what's reparations, what's remedy for 30 years of unconstitutional torture? That's release. Nothing short of it. And that's what we are going to do in this next period, is work towards Mumia's release. And Suzanne has outlined the 3 campaigns that we've put forth that are going to crack this puzzle. I believe that given the shift in consciousness that has happened in this country after the criminal execution of Troy Davis and after the dramatic protests of Occupy Wall Street, that we can in fact talk about releasing Mumia in this next period, in Francis Golden's lifetime, and Francis Golden is 87 years old. I'm going to say that this new situation in which Mumia is in exposes the repressive, vindictive, and punitive character of the state and the violence it unleashes against people who dare to claim their humanity. All of the people who are in the RHUs in the United States, I believe there are 80,000 of them permanently, although we saw the statistic 200,000 people tortured by these prisons day in and day out. Why? Because they did not accept the conditions of their torture and confinement in general population. Essentially, Mumia is becoming the face, once again, of everything that is wrong with this society and with the criminal justice system. And that's why this cannot stand any longer. They know that if they keep him longer in this torturous condition, that his case will blow the hell out of solitary confinement. So I believe that the pressure that we are putting on them is going to force them to compromise immediately, because they don't want any more attention on this disaster. But this is what I want to say about torture and solitary confinement. The Magna Carta, which is essentially the basis of Western law, is a statement that says that the king cannot grab you from society, sequester you, and throw you in jail. That's the basis of American and Western law, that the state cannot sequester you and throw you in a prison in the dark with no access to due process. And that's precisely what this society is doing day in and day out. They're doing it to Mumia, they're doing it to so many people. Now let me just say why it's important for us to fight against this. Because it actually corrodes the fabric of society. It actually challenges the idea of the human spirit. It challenges the idea of democracy. Everything that we have been fighting for over centuries, part of what King Downing said is that there used to be a time in which the state and ordinary people engaged in barbaric acts. And because of us, because of struggle, we've civilized the state. And now the state is hanging on to its power and wants to turn the clock back. We have to say, absolutely not. We will not stand for torture. We will not stand for silencing of the human spirit. We will not stand for the absolute control that the carceral state wants to essentially unleash on ordinary people, on people who are poor, on people who are black, on people who are Latino, on immigrants, on people who fight back and who dare to say that there's something in the soul that cries for freedom. That is why Mumia is in solitary confinement today. But again, their situation, their confinement of Mumia cannot stand too long because it is unlawful and the Supreme Court has said so. We've been saying so for 30 years. So we're going to say we're off to Camp Hill right now to say absolutely not. Release our brother immediately, but most importantly, get ready for the new struggle in this movement because we're about to release our brother. And behind him, we're going to release Maroon Schultz, all the political prisoners, and we're going to abolish the new Jim Crow. Thank you.
Off in act. Off in act. Off in act. Off in act. Keep remembering that. Keep that in mind. Also, free Mumia Douglas. Free Mumia Douglas. Free Russell Turner. Free Russell Turner. I like that. Okay, now we are facing, now it was the tyranny of the clock, now it's cruel and unusual punishment of the clock. We've shifted to the 8th Amendment. We cannot get to the point that we have to invoke international law over the clock as a form of human rights violation, because these folks have someplace else they gotta go. They need to go and do this delivery of these petitions. So, I wanna ask the last folks to really, really keep an eye on the clock. I'm sorry it's come down to this at this point. We really gotta move. Now we're going back into family mode. You see how it rotates here? Oh, and I also forgot that we have a scholar and an academic here as well. Can't you tell by the fiery speech?
I'm gonna get fired for that.
No, we'll be out there organizing, and just like we're gonna moving him from death row to solitary, then we're moving from solitary to general population, then we're moving out into the streets. Then we're going to get him damages and we're going to move him into a fancy house or whatever it is he wants. We're just going to keep moving it higher and higher and higher and not stop until he's out and completely repaired mentally, physically, and economically for this injustice. Now, we're shifting into the family mode and we're going to hear from a family member of someone who is inside under these conditions in the same institution. So let's hear from Karen Ali. Please come on, give it up. These are the folks that are here that you saw on
the video. Peace. Peace. I'd just like to start off to say that I didn't come here today to speak, and so I'm a little anxious about that, but I came to support this issue because as a family member, I'm living it, and I've felt it, and I know that us collectively as a people can make things happen. And so I wanted to lend my support and be there for this issue. But just briefly, I wanted to tell you a little bit about my husband's situation. My husband, Omar Askia Ali, has been incarcerated over 40 years for a crime in which he is totally innocent of. And just briefly to say that in 10 years after his initial arrest, he was convicted, not 10 years after, he was convicted of this crime, and 10 years after it was overturned and appeal, he was convicted under Judge McDermott, and it was overturned because his constitutional rights were violated. And he was retried again after 10 years, and this time he was tried for under Judge Sabo with Barbara Christie as the district attorney. And these are the I mentioned those people because these are the tactics they use when there is no evidence, and they pull up. That's when they implement the constitutional violation to assure a conviction, and that is what they did. And in the last 30 years after that, he's been incarcerated over 40 years, he has been in a constant state of appeal, in which he is at this time still in appeal. But in the meantime, he has been at different institutions around the state system, and he just recently had received a transfer back to Monopoly, which was considered to be a transfer closer to home. He was there for about 3 years, and he was involved in initiating a movement to motivate a legislator in the state of Pennsylvania to consider introduce legislation for parole eligibility for lifers, an issue which we were told was very unpopular and political suicide at this time, but still he was fighting for his life to have another vehicle, not for just him, but other individuals who may have been guilty or not guilty of what they were accused of as an avenue of hope, a light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. And because of that involvement, he was put in the RHU at Monopoly. At that time, I contact everyone I could think of, because he's always been a political activist prior to being incarcerated, and I have too over the years. So we have been on a lot of issues and had a lot of contacts. And so I tried to contact everyone I could think of to inform them of his situation and to reach out and try to help us in getting him, first of all, out of the RHU, because if you can imagine, and I'm sure you can, an individual being incarcerated for over 40 years and to suddenly be restricted into an RHU environment with, like we talked about, losing all of your material things, that your support systems that you have that keep you sane and to keep you in communication with your community and contacts and so forth like that. This is what the situation we found ourselves in, and I'm trying to speak fast. But this was the situation, and he was permitted a 15-minute phone call. Well, this was after a while. Initially, he was permitted only one hour visit once a month. And I have been visiting him over these years at least three times a month. Sometimes on bad months, twice or maybe once, but consistently. And he was only allowed an hour visit once a month. And then after being in the hole for a few months, they did also allow him to add in a 15-minute phone call once a month. So this is what he was getting. I called up to Wexler's office. I called every place I could think of and asked, why is he didn't do anything. The only thing he was doing was fighting for his life and trying to get this legislation. Well, when it came down, they broke it down to me that he was in violation of an institutional rule. That's why they had put him in the RHU. And he had to go before this review board that the attorney had spoke about. He went before the review board. One other thing, they said that they really couldn't intervene in his actions at all until it was resolved through his appellate process within the RHU. He had to go through a review board. He went through this review board, and the review board, interestingly or not, found no merit to the accusation and dismissed it and said that he was to be released from the RHU. However, there's a technicality that came to our attention that even though it was no merit to it, the complaining officer who made the report has 2 other opportunities to submit the same charge. He couldn't change it, but he could resubmit the same charge. So when he resubmitted it, then they found him in violation of a couple of the things that he was supposed to have been involved, breaking the rules of the institution. So with that, then they said that he was sentenced to 60 days in the RHU. Well, about the 50-something day or something like that, then they said they changed his sentence to a transfer. We fought a long time to get him closer to home as possible, but as I said, I made a lot of calls and things, and since nothing was happening with that, we felt it was a real dangerous situation and fragile situation for him to be in this kind of condition. So a transfer was like the best thing as far as we were concerned. So he was recently transferred out. He stayed in that RHU for over 6 months. And then they did transfer him out, but they transferred him back to a Housedale institution, which is over 5 hours away from me driving up the turnpike to from our home in Philadelphia. But at least he was put in the hold there for a little while when he first came back to the institution. But then they did let him out into population. So I just say, one thing I'd just like to add is that I see our experiences with RHU is a tool that the institution used to break people. Right. They try to break you, they break your support system, they break you mentally, they try to break your family, they try to break you in any way that, like, especially strong people who are advocates and fighting for rights and things that they're entitled to, and things like that. This is the tool in which they use in the dark of the night and the day of the week or whatever to implement things that aren't laws out in the street, but are their rules and regulations. So like I said, I came here to support you all, but I would just like to say in ending that justice is freedom for Omar Askia Ali, and that's what we're fighting for, and I'm also fighting for the release of Mumia Abdul-Jabbar. Thank you.
You know, give Karen Ali another hand, a big hand, because this is a family and she's a fighter. She's not taking on flying down. Justice for Omar Askia Ali.
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 All right, so are we adopting her into the family?
Yes.
We're going to let her know every chance we have?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay.
Kiss.
People used to do that to me when I was in school. So I thought she was standing behind you. People used to do that.
Pam is behind Mumia.
Okay. All right. Come on up.
Pam with Mumia.
Although I know time is of the essence, I just need 1 minute. I just wanted to let you know, I'm from Delaware. I'm with the Campaign in the Death Penalty, head of the Delaware chapter. Yeah, and I want you guys to know, if you don't already, and I imagine many of you do, don't be fooled by our name. Even though we're the Campaign in the Death Penalty, we are also solidly opposed to LWOP. We are fighting life without parole. We see that as another form of the death penalty. As Mumia calls it, the slow death row. Okay, it is another form of the death penalty. We are solidly opposed to that. Not all death row abolitionists are. They may see that as an alternative, but it is not an alternative in our view. And we are fighting that as much as the death penalty. We've been fighting such fronts as Oscar Grant, the Pelican Bay hunger strike. We take on many other issues in addition to the death penalty. I want to make that known. We are in solidarity with Mumia as we always have been. The fight continues. I do also want to let you know, in case you have missed on the news, Delaware is starting the new year with some victories.
Okay, we had suffered a loss, a tremendous loss with Troy Davis, and Martina, who was on the board of the Campaign of the Death Penalty, our sister, our comrade in the struggle, and that was a tremendous loss. But we are seeing a change in Delaware. The first week of the new year, we have a overturned death sentence of Jermaine Marlowe Wright. He has yet to hit the streets, but it's a matter of time. This man spent 20 years innocent on death row. And I guarantee when he hits the streets, you will be seeing him at these events, okay? Because he will be coming with me to speak. Another victory is, for the first time ever, the Delaware Pardon Board and the Delaware Governor, Jack Markell at the time, has given clemency to death row inmate. That's Robert Gaddis, who just last week was commuted. Okay? Again, the struggle continues. It's not over. But we are starting off, we've made some cracks in the system in Delaware, and I'm ready to just keep rolling until it crumbles, okay? We're on fire, and we're going to continue, but we are with Mumia all the way until we get him home, okay? Thank you for having us.
Give it up for Sandra Jones. That was great for 3 reasons. First of all, mentioning LWOP, because we are not going to stand for life without parole. We're not going to find fire, okay? We are strongly behind that, and we hadn't mentioned this, so I appreciate you mentioned that. The other thing is we have to celebrate the victories. That's right. You know, we tend to just throw them over our shoulder and keep looking ahead, but we have to take a moment and regroup and celebrate these things so that we can keep moving forward with this, renew the strength that we had when we started the one that just resulted in the victory. The other thing is, I like those victories about the overturned convictions and the granting of clemency. Maybe that will serve as an example for somebody to grant a clemency or do that pen. This is the slowest pen. This is the slowest pen I've seen, except when you're re-signing the National Defense Authorization Act.
Oh, I like that.
All right, that's good. I like that. What is he signing? What does it say?
We Mumia now.
Yeah, now. Emphasize it now.
That's a good one. I like that.
Not after re-election, not for the next president, but when.
Now.
Okay, I will put this right up here.
Excuse me. Has the media or the president have seen that yet?
See what this?
Yes.
Probably their undercover operatives have probably seen it. We need to scan it, put it up. Who created this? Stand up, loud, give him a hand. Hold in the show with everybody.
All right. Right now. You gonna stand there? I'm about to post it. Take a picture of it. Put it on the internet.
That's a good one.
Right. That's it.
Mic check. Mic check. Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Yes, he will. Yes, he will.
You see this on the 24th.
Oh, say, go ahead. Go here, just say it. Go ahead.
You will see this on the 24th when we go to Washington, D.C. You will see this and many other cities.
We'll take 10,000 copies of that.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay, now we've gotten to the pointed moment. We've had a great conversation. We've shared a lot of information from the activist side, from the legal side, from the creative and film and writing side, and from the family side. And so now we're going to close it out with Daryl Jordan from our Third World Coalition, who has been working on this from the side of the view that this is also a racial issue as well as a justice issue. In fact, it's a racial issue before a justice issue. That's why we say racial and then justice. Okay? And he is in addition to what he's going to say, he has a statement from our Pittsburgh office, where we are convening the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Torture. We're inviting everybody here now for a convergence of the folks who are working on mumia, people working on death penalty and LWOP, to now join the solitary confinement group here in Pennsylvania that has had 2 conventions, had one in the beginning of November, and is now moving forward on the street fronts and the legislative front and the inside front. There are some legislators who are sympathetic to the issue of solitary confinement, and they're making a big push now up in the State House here in Pennsylvania to get that law enacted, to get that law first introduced and enacted, and it's going to take this family joined with the folks around the rest of the state to make that happen. So are you with it?
Yes.
Are you with it?
Yes.
Okay.
Out in at.
Out in at and up there at the State House. So Daryl Jordan.
Hello again, everybody. I'm glad we survived the technical stuff. That's the least of our problems today, and I'm glad. I want to remind you that a friend of ours, Marshal Lady Conway, still illegally locked down in Maryland, is here with us in spirit. Because of the chaos today, running around and stuff, we didn't get a chance to do all the mess that they make us go through for one brother to communicate with all of us out here. You know, they continue to make it really hard for brothers and sisters to stay in contact with each other. And for all the things that we've mentioned today, that is as big a punishment as anything for the folks that we love and support who are locked down behind these walls. If they can continue to keep us from communicating with each other, from showing our support and showing our love, that is the most cruel part of cruel and unusual punishment. And we should keep that in mind, that this is not a vindictive kind of struggle. This is a struggle that we do because we love the brothers and sisters who sacrifice on our behalf, and we just want to show them some of that love. Now, I have a statement from, bear with me, I got to pronounce the sister's name, but she's my co-worker. Her name is Scylla Wafotik, and I just messed it up. Scylla can beat me up when she catch up with me. She's the American Friends Service Committee's Mid-Atlantic Regional Office Program Director for up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And this is her statement on solitary confinement. The American Friends Service Committee is deeply concerned about the extensive use of solitary confinement as a punitive measure in our prisons. We consider it to be a violation of human rights and a form of torture when a person is held in tiny cells for 23 hours a day, deprived of all sensory contact with others except their guards, for a prolonged length of time, sometimes decades. United Nations Special Rapporteur on Torture has recently declared, in his opinion, prolonged solitary confinement of more than 15 days violates the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman, or Degrading Treatment. Although it has been well documented that the use of isolation and sensory deprivation can aggravate or even cause mental illness and psychiatric syndromes, over 2,500 people are still being held in these conditions in Pennsylvania alone. These prisoners are totally at the mercy of their guards, and organizations such as the American Friends Service Committee and Human Rights Coalition Fed Up have been documenting abuse experienced by prisoners in isolation for many years. Recently at SCI Pittsburgh, a series of horrendous sexual and physical abuse cases have been exposed by a grand jury investigation. These abuses have been going on for at least 2 years, and as many as 11 guards and 4 officers are expected to be arrested in all. And according to Human Rights Coalition Fed Up, this is just the tip of the iceberg. As more and more of the stories come to light, it brings back memories of the pictures and description of torture at Abu Ghraib. In Pennsylvania, the American Friends Service Committee is part of the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Torture, a coalition of groups from around the state who are seeking ways to address issues of prolonged isolation, such as Mumia Abu-Jamal is experiencing and will experience him for the rest of his life unless we do our work and get him out.
That's right.
We are calling on the Department of Corrections and for our legislature to stop using isolation as a punitive measure and to respect the human rights of all prisoners. We hope others will join us to address this grievous violation of human rights, not only for Mumia, but for all prisoners in Pennsylvania, in the United States, and around the world. Thank you.
All right, another hand for Daryl Jordan, Third World Coalition. Pam was walking around with 2 hats. One was on her head and the other was something else. So what's next? What's up?
I just want to let people know we raised the necessary money to pay for the building here with $11 over. I think we need to start talking now about car caravanning. Darryl was getting the directions. But another thing we got to remember, another reason why they don't want mumia in general population, because you know that is Klan land, Aryan Brotherhood land, and it's from the people who live in the area. The Klan members are prison guards, and you know they're running the prison. And for people who really don't understand, inside those prisons, the stories of the Klan's beatings, the Klan murders that go on inside these prisons, they don't want mumia in general population, because one thing for sure they know, the sound will go around the world and things will happen. But we're definitely going to head up to the prison now. How many cars do we have? 1, Omi is 2, Mike is 3. And I really want to acknowledge too the presence of our brother Tony Montero, who did something last week on labor, and he tied it into mumia. The International Action Center has that speech online. It is a must hear for anyone that's dealing with the issue of labor and what is going on. This brother is magnificent in tying things in. And also on the 1st, February the 1st, I'm speaking in New York, kicking off Black History Month with mumia, with Fraternity Automatics and Sister Johanna Fernandez. We're showing your film, and no better time than to say, will you accompany me?
Yes.
Yes, okay. On the 5th of February at Darling Palace, and the book, The Cell, Mumia Mumia has a piece signed that will, what do you call that thing when you sign the book? When you sign the book? Autograph. You know, autographed by Mumia and Mark Lamont Hill. Mumia's daughter Goldie will be there. Professor Tony Montero will be a part of a panel. And Ramona Africa and Mark, they're the panel. Giving an update will be hopefully Professor Johanna Fernandez and Michael Cord, and there's somebody else, I can't think of it right now. But you know, just to make sure that people know the event is free, and also you know, please come, please purchase the book, because the money goes towards the legal defense and helping mumia out. 1310, I passed it around to everybody. Spread the word, Twitter, and all those good things you do with those computers. And you know, for people like me who's not techie savage, talk about it.